Thank you for that, Tim. And that is a wonderful reminder about this remembrance of his birth coming up. And the fact that at that moment he certainly was an example of someone who was standing in the EYE of the storm, in the center. And within himself, he certainly was in that very centered and very calm place in the midst of all of that drama, as you will see. Today now begins the third step of your very conscious ministerial transition. All churches go through ministerial transition. Some of them go through several of them often. But very few churches in our history, in our Unity history at least, have really made conscious transitions. Only in the last few years have we been addressing this in a way that supports churches in moving through this time in between ministers in such a way that they really begin to know who they are as a congregation without the previous ministers that they've had. Who are they without that? And begin to shape their ideas about who they are and what they desire, what their own vision is, so that they can attract to them someone who is in alignment with that and will move them forward in their vision and their mission. And so I want to acknowledge your board and acknowledge you for making the choice to do this in such a way that gives you a far better chance of thriving as you step into this new future that you are anticipating. Someone said to me, asked me this morning, so is there hope? And I said, there's not just hope, it is assured. You are assured, because as you move through this space, that you are indeed blessed and all is well. So I want you to know that. Things are just absolutely fine. I know that you've been hearing about this book, The Eye of the Storm, for some time. And as you know, the name of the book is the I, the capital I, in other words, me, the eye of the storm. How many of you have already gotten your copy of the book? Yeah, okay. Has anybody started reading it yet? Oh, good. Okay. I want to tell you, I've taught this book, and I'm not talking about just on Sunday mornings, but the whole 8-week study, both doing the Sunday lessons and teaching the class, 15 times. And you would think that I would know it very well and know what I'm going to say. And I discover that every time I do this study, I learn incredibly valuable things about myself that forward my own spiritual journey. And so I'm eager for you to delve into this and begin your own journey with it as well. Now, the first chapter of the book is titled Nothing and No One is Against You. And the reason that I don't title this talk that way is because very few people believe that, and they don't come to hear what I have to say on Sunday. So I just call it Standing in Your Truth, because for me that actually is a stand in our truth, to know that nothing and no one is against us. So do you believe that? Nothing and no one is against you. It's certainly not the commonly accepted notion, is it? It isn't. And I would guess that almost all of you have had some very bad things happen to you. Yeah? All of us had some things happen to us in our life which we would not necessarily call good. Someone has done something hurtful to us, perhaps someone that we trusted a great deal. Yeah? Almost all of us have had that happen. So how do you call that good? In the face of that evidence, how do we say nothing and no one is against us? Now this book starts, if you read the foreword and the introduction, which very often I've discovered that I sometimes skip those when I'm reading books, so I don't know if you have, so if you have, go back and read them. But it starts with this supposition, this story of the agreements that we make before we ever come to be embodied in the human form as a human baby, physical form as a human baby. Now, I don't know whether that is accurate or true. It may well be. I love the story. But the truth is, I don't know whether that's absolutely how it happens. And to me, it doesn't even matter whether that is so. What I do know is, since I accepted this principle that nothing and no one is against me, My life has gotten better and better, and it is more and more easily and often filled with ease and grace. Because it is about accepting the truth that even if someone does something very hurtful to me, and you and I do know that sometimes people do things that are hurtful, whether they mean to or not, but once it happens, if I'm willing to recognize that it also happens for me, then I can begin to use that event as information about my thoughts and my beliefs and my fantasies and my expectations, and begin to change my life and stop being a victim of other people and events. And change my life going forward for the better. So to know that nothing and no one is against me, I know that whatever may happen to me also happens for me if I'm willing to see it that way. Now, that things happen, people do things, period. Assigning blame or speculating about why does not serve me or them. Thoughts of fear and lack which generate then feelings of fear and lack, which if dwelt upon create a belief in fear and lack, can only occur when I feel disconnected from my divine wholeness. You know that, right? When we're really centered in our divine wholeness, then there is no fear. There is no sense of lack. Even if I'm in a situation where there is a real threat to whether I live or die, if I'm centered in my wholeness, my oneness with Spirit, I can be at peace. I can realistically know that there is a danger, but if I'm at peace, if there is anything I can do about it that might prevent my demise, then I will be divinely guided. I will know what to do, how to do it, and when to do it. A few years ago, there was a wonderful story about a woman in Atlanta. A man had been in a courthouse and had a gun, and he shot several people and escaped from the courthouse and was, running through Atlanta and just happened upon this woman going into her house and at gunpoint forced her to let him in her house. And 24 hours later, he surrendered to the police who'd been looking for him all over Atlanta. And as the story came out, what was revealed that this woman had just begun really to turn her life over to God. And she began to share that with this man and to comfort him and to reassure him that regardless of what he had done, he could be forgiven and all could be well. And he did not hurt her. He totally changed his tone and finally turned himself in. She was so at peace. She was able to be with him in such a way, even though there was great danger to her, that she changed his life as well, or she created a space that he could step into to change his own life. It's a wonderful story. So you see, even when our own life and our own history happens to us, our own history, even our own life, is not against us. Even the really terrible mistakes that we've made, or the terrible things that have happened to us, or the terrible things that we have done, our past does not have to define us. Our future is not etched in stone because of what has happened back there. Our future only offers us possibilities in an infinite sea of possibilities. Isn't that good news? Our past, whatever it was, has offered us possibilities. My disappointments with people are a result of my having placed responsibility for my own happiness on someone else. Everything that I have interpreted as being for me or being against me has its roots within me. Our wholeness, our happiness, our peace, our prosperity, our health cannot be found outside of us, period. So you know what that makes us? a totally responsible person. Because whether we act like we're a totally responsible person or not, we are anyway. And what I loved discovering in Unity, that while I could change my life for the better if I took responsibility for it, it meant that if I recognized that I had a part in how I had perceived what happened to me in the past, I could re-perceive it in a way that would help me move forward in a happier, healthier way in the future. I cannot really blame someone else for what happened to me, and I can't blame them for what happens to me from now on. If I had a choice about how it affected me, and I did, then I have a choice about the trajectory of my life in the future. Now, it is not to say that what others have done is right or excusable or okay to allow. I do not mean that at all. I am not saying it is okay for people to hurt or abuse or take advantage. And anger about that can be justified and a normal reaction. But let's think about where anger comes from. Anger comes from the amygdala, the part of our brain that has registered all of the things and all of the emotions that have happened to us that we register as either pleasant or unpleasant, so that we would know when we met it again whether to fight, flight, or freeze. It's the way it is. So we know that if we are able to fully embrace that fear of the unknown, or the fear of danger or safety of our being, and if we're willing to see that lack is only a state of mind, then what is the purpose of anger in this civilized society, in this culture that we live in, where we have houses and we go to the grocery store, and for the most part we know that we are safe in our homes and mostly in our cars if we drive defensively and all of those kinds of things. I believe that the use of anger, the way that anger serves us now, the purpose for it in our lives now, is to keep us from allowing ourselves or others to be abused. But being angry at someone is not an appropriate response. And the anger at them can prevent us from dealing with the perpetrator in appropriate ways that might protect others and ourselves, as well as help the perpetrator behave differently as well. However, anger at the behavior and taking steps to intervene in the behavior is, in my opinion at least, a legitimate use of anger. In fact, for some of us, our past experiences with and recovery from abuse has provided us experience and knowledge to recognize it and work for equality and justice. So in the past, that has provided an opportunity for service to others, which is part of my path. Then when we are doing that, we are called to be the way of God as expressing in our life. By separating our thoughts, feelings, and thoughts about the behavior from our thoughts, feelings, and beliefs about the person, then we can do that. And we can stand as the way of God. If we don't separate them and we express that anger toward the person, then we are in the way of God. Do you get it? We want to be the way of God, not in the way of God. Each experience we have, both pleasant and unpleasant, offers us opportunities for growth. And our soul growth is moving us toward being the way of God or divine acceptance. 35 years ago, I had a minister who once spoke about receiving his God mission. And I thought, oh, I want to do that. And immediately in my meditation, I began saying, God, I want to know what my God mission is. I want to know what my God mission is. And I imagined in my grandiose thinking that it would be speaking to hundreds, if not thousands of people about unity truth. And I would be a great minister. And it didn't happen, and I asked, and it didn't happen, and I didn't get it, and it didn't happen. And finally, I sort of forgot about it, and I quit asking. And then one day, out of the blue, after a fairly long period of really intensive studying, prayer, and meditation, and surrendering, I got it. And by God mission, was to live my life unconditionally loving.
Yes.
Could you make it a little bit harder, do you think? I got the words of the mission, but not the meaning of what it meant to be. In fact, I'm still awakening to what it means to live my life unconditionally loving. I had been working for a man for a while when this occurred, who was one of the most difficult and immature adults that I had ever had the unfortunate situation to be in close association with. He was erratic, he was unreliable, he was manipulative, divisive in the way he treated and dealt with staff. He was dishonest and alternately completely charming. I'd been trying for months to find another job, but I couldn't find one anywhere that came even close to paying what I was earning, given the kind of work that I wanted to do. I had prayed about him, I had prayed for him, I had prayed for myself. I was trying desperately to love him as a child of God, unconditionally. One day I left the business to run an errand, and I was completely frustrated with him. He'd just been impossible all morning. And as I drove to my destination in frustration, I pounded on the steering wheel. I'm crying out, God, help me. I cannot go on here. He's such an immature little boy. And the Spirit spoke to me immediately and said, what if he were just a little boy? What would you do then? It stopped me in my tracks. I said, okay. I want to learn to love him unconditionally. Help me. Give me something that will help me learn to love him unconditionally. And immediately, I got a vision of him as a 4-year-old boy sitting on a piano bench having his picture taken. And that sweet little boyish grin that I knew so well that he still had even at 55 or 56. After that, every time I thought about him or had a problem with him, I would bring up that picture of that little boy and just pray for him and bless him and practice loving that little boy, which got easier and easier to do. Once that happened, I was able to take action and say things to him that nobody else in the place could say. I began to love him unconditionally and really see him as a child of God in spite of his behavior. And he would listen to me. About a year after that, I was called to his home by his wife, and she explained that he had overdosed 2 days before, that it was the 3rd time, and that this time he had nearly died. I learned for the first time that he had been multiply addicted to many kinds of drugs for over 40 years. I had never been around that before, and I had no idea that that's what it was. He was out of the woods now, but now the whole family was going to go in recovery. And they would be away for at least 4 months. And he would probably be away for at least 2 years. And now I would be fully responsible for the business. I was already in seminary at the time, and so for the next year I saw him only once or, every few months. I dealt with the accountants and the attorneys and occasionally his wife. But then, I graduated and I took a church that was 3 hours away. We arranged for new management for the business, and I moved. And a week later, he died of a heart attack in bed. It was as if he came to this planet to teach me how to love unconditionally. He did several things to me. He lied to me, he deceived me, he took money from the business that I couldn't account for, he conspired with other employees against me, and what he did for me is immeasurable. One more story, and with it, a reminder that we are never done as long as we are here. Our propensity for forgetting our lessons and reverting to fear and lack continues until we deal with even the deepest issues in our psyche. And mine have certainly been my lifelong childhood inability to feel loved and be willing to have love and compassion for myself. I am clear that Jesus' admonition to love others as we love ourselves means this: we can only love others to the extent that we love ourselves. We can only have compassion for others to the extent that we have compassion for ourselves. I agreed 3 years ago to move in with my daughter who needed to finish some degree work so that I could help her financially and also so that I could provide some care for my teenage granddaughter, chauffeuring and supervision and that sort of thing. It was very hard. I don't know if you know about adult mothers and daughters living together, but it often has its challenges anyway. And she and I are very different, and I knew from the beginning that it would be difficult for me. We have very different understanding of chaos and order, and she's just fine with things being, pretty chaotic around the house, and I'm not really. But I worked on myself a lot, knowing going in that part of this experience of living with her was about my expectations and my intentions to make certain that she did not feel criticized in any way because, by the way, her primary experience of me growing up was a very critical and overbearing mother. So while it was still very difficult for me to tolerate some of the things that didn't bother her at all, I did pretty well, actually. At the end of the year, she got her degree, and I began to look for an apartment. And one day I just mentioned that, oh, by the way, I went to this particular building, and I'm going to go look at an apartment. I think I would really like it there. And she was very upset and surprised. She did not realize that our agreement had been for 1 year, and she thought that I was going to stay. So once again, in my desire that she not feel rejected by me or criticized by me, I stopped planning to move. But I wasn't happy about it. I didn't like living there all that much. And I started counting up all of the things that I did. All of the ways that I had not judged her for doing things that I thought she shouldn't do, or not doing things I thought she ought to do. I became angry, felt unappreciated after all. Look at all the lovely apartment I gave up and the expense that I gave up to move in with her and the things that I sold because there wasn't room for her in her house in a garage sale and got almost nothing for them. One Sunday night on January, that happened about in August or September, so in January, I was watching TV and I suddenly reached up and I felt this huge lump in my breast. I went to the doctor and was diagnosed with two very large tumors, larger than golf balls, and a severely infected lymph node as well. They recommended a protocol of 6 months of chemo, then surgery, and then radiation. I said yes to and followed the cure that they set out for me, for the most part at least. But I also knew that this was the opportunity for me to do my healing work. The cure is one thing. The healing is quite another. I recognized that I was blaming my daughter for my unhappiness. Remember, nothing and no one is against us. My unhappiness sprang from my own forgiveness of myself because of my guilt about being a neglectful and critical parent when she was a child. I also recognized how I had held anger and judgment against some others for their behavior, particularly in some of the work I do in Unity Worldwide Ministries. Remember, the behaviors are not excusable, but the people can be forgiven and should be forgiven, and forgiveness is never for the other person. It is always, always, always and only for us, for ourselves. What they do is never against us or anyone else that we believe needs our protection. Now, in 1 or 2 cases, it was necessary to step in to stop further abuse from continuing. But their behavior offered me possibilities in an infinite sea of possibilities. And my choice was to either continue being resentful and judgmental and unhappy and blaming and causing pain and discomfort and illness for myself, or to forgive them unconditionally and love them unconditionally, while also doing the job that was mine to do in regard to their behavior. Do you get the difference? I chose during that experience radical self-love and radical self-compassion. 7 months later, surgery found me completely clear of all cancer. Even the lymph node that was so badly infected was not infected, and they thought they would have to take somewhere between 20 and 28 lymph nodes, and they only took 4. There was absolutely no sign of the cancer in my body. Nothing and no one is against me. Nothing and no one stands between me and my highest good. If it is mine in consciousness, it comes to me easily, naturally, and gracefully. Some of the things that have happened in my life and my recovery and my willingness to forgive have served me in the most surprising and unpredictable ways in my years in the ministry. The storm that I may be caught in can become the drama that is only happening around me without my feelings and emotions being hijacked by it. And when I'm willing to step into the center of my being, in the eye of the storm that is me, be accountable for my reactions and my actions. Forgive myself, forgive others. I am at peace. And the appropriate action that needs to be taken can be taken. A friend of mine once decided that she wanted to take a pottery class, but she was worried because she was pioneering a church and she didn't have much time or much money, and she was afraid about it, but she really wanted to do it, so she decided to do it anyway. And in her first class, the instructor said to spin the wheel and keep her eye on the center of the clay. And she began to spin her wheel and looked down at this big lumpy glob of clay on this wheel and said, well, where's the center? And he said, the place where nothing is moving. That is the eye of the storm. Keep your mind's eye on the place within you where nothing is moving. Become the EYE of the storm, centered, at peace, and still. The opportunities that this book and this group discussion allows for you is to be peace. And I promise you from my own experience, it can be life-changing.